Hi everyone, this is Mir and you are watching Contemporary Politics. Today I am back with one more video which will talk about Cold War, its meaning and definitions. But before I start my video, I would want you to like the video, press the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you may not miss any video that I will be uploading from time to time on my channel, and these videos are going to help you a lot. Let's start the video. I am Mir and today we will be talking about meaning of Cold War. So my dear students, till date I have never told you about Cold War, and this is the first lecture of your class 12 political science. So you may have heard about this term, what Cold War is all about and how it came into being. But first of all, we need to understand the meaning of Cold War, and we will discuss some of the definitions of Cold War, and then only we shall discuss the history of Cold War, how it came into being and what were the real causes of the Cold War. So Cold War actually is a situation that is tense in nature, in which both the superpowers or any other two countries in the world which are having a hostile relations against each other. They make moves and counter moves, allies and counter allies to weaken the other state and strengthen themselves. So in short, you can say that Cold War is a nerve war, it is a propaganda war, and it is a war-like hysteria that is kept into operation. So let's talk about the Cold War, okay? Cold War is the term that we will be talking about today, as I told you. So after the Second World War, the remarkable result of the Second World War was the end of the wartime alliance that the Allied forces had, and the beginning of the Cold War era. It was an era of division, distrust, suspicion and all the other things that could have made relations very, very tense between two superpowers in the world, that is USA and USSR. So I'll be repeating my point. I said that in Second World War or during the Second World War, starting from 1939 to 1945, these two superpowers of the world, they fought together against the German forces. They fought together against the Nazist reign in the world, so that they could end such a kind of atmosphere and they could give something good to their people, and peace will be restored to the lands of the world. But let me tell you that after the end of the Second World War, that is in 1945, a situation came into being, and the wartime alliance that these two countries had, the friendship that these two countries had, it came to an end, and soon after that started an era of division, distrust and suspicion. And both these countries were making moves and counter moves. They're making allies and counter allies so that they can strengthen themselves and can weaken the other part of the world or the other superpower of the world. In other words, the tense and hostile relations that developed between the capitalist countries led by the United States of America, or the you can say liberal democratic countries led by United States of America, and the communist nations headed by Soviet Union in the years after the end of the Second World War, that is 1945. Starting from 1939 to 1945 till 1991, this atmosphere of division, distrust and suspicion was going on between these two superpowers of the world, which was termed as Cold War. I said starting from 1945 to 1991, because Cold War came into being soon after the end of the Second World War, that is 1945, and it ended in 1991 with the disintegration of Soviet Union, with the disintegration of the second superpower of the world, and then started a new era. We are not going to talk about that. So let me tell you the other things about Cold War. So you can say that, in other words, Cold War may be regarded the tense and hostile relations that developed between the capitalist countries led by USA and communist countries headed by Soviet Union was popularly known as Cold War. It was not an actual war, and actually a hot war never came into being between these two countries, even though a number of wars were fought between 1945 till 1991, and both the superpowers were a part of, somehow indirectly they were a part of these wars. But let me tell you that these wars never converted into what was called as a Third World War, which would have been a catastrophic kind of thing for the whole world, because they knew that if a Third World War comes into being, that is going to be the end of the world. I'll be talking about that again. I will tell you again that this war was not an actual war, but it was a propaganda war, it was a nerve war, and it was a war-like situation that was kept into operation between USA and USSR from 1945 to 1991 for more than 45 years. So you can say that both these countries were making use of their spies. They were making use of the territories of their allied countries. They were making use of the propaganda. They were making use of the newspapers, journals, books, articles, as well as the media to weaken the other part of the world and to strengthen themselves every now and then. So if you really want to understand the concept of Cold War, first of all, you need to understand the definitions of Cold War. Then we need to discuss the history of Cold War, how and when it came into being, and then we shall be discussing about the causes of the Cold War. So again, I said that the tense and hostile relations that developed between USA and its countries and USSR and its countries was popularly known as Cold War. So Cold War is actually a vast term which we need to understand. I may even say that in this world, in the contemporary world, we are facing the same kind of problem, and we are actually in neo-Cold War. Because you see a number of countries, they have, they don't have good relations with each other. So that's why they are trying their level best to weaken the enemy that they have on the other side of the world or on the other side of the border. And they're making moves and counter moves. They don't want to give any chance to their enemy, so that this enemy could be more powerful and could overrun the territories occupied by my country or by that country. So this is what Cold War is all about, in which no actual war comes into being, but the atmosphere of division, distrust, suspicion, or you can say, ideological war is fought between the nations at the international level. So let's talk about the definitions of Cold War to understand the concept of Cold War again in a best way. Okay, so I said I will be talking about the definitions of Cold War. Definitions of Cold War. Let's talk about the definitions of Cold War. One of the definitions has been given by Florence Allott. And Michelle Summerskill. Michelle Summerskill. Both these contemporary political thinkers, they have written in their book, which is called as the Dictionary of Politics. Dictionary of Politics is the name of the book in which they have given the definition of Cold War. They say it is a state of tension, a state of tension, okay, between countries in which each side countries in which each side adopts policies designed to strengthen itself and weaken the other, line falling short of actual hot war. Okay, so they said that it is a state of tension between countries in which each side adopts policies designed to strengthen itself and weaken the other, line falling short of actual hot war. I told you that it was not an actual war. An actual war was not fought between USA and USSR starting from 1945 to 1991, even though that they were a part of a number of wars that were fought that time in the world, but they never involved in what was called as the Third World War. You know, number of wars I'm talking about, like the Vietnam War, like the Korean War crisis, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, Afghan War crisis, even though that they were, you know, actually making use of the policies and programs to strengthen themselves and to weaken the other country of the world. One of the important developments, or one of the important steps that was taken by the superpowers of the world to define Cold War and to strengthen themselves and to weaken the other was the military pact, or the military pacts that was signed by both the countries. I'll be talking about these two military pacts that were signed by USA and its countries, USSR and its countries. For example, you know, one of the important, you know, steps to strengthen itself, like USA tried to strengthen itself by making an alliance called as NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was signed in April 1945. Let me tell you what NATO was all about. Actually, 12 countries of the Western Europe, they signed a pact with United States of America and became a part and parcel of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949. Not 1945, 1949. So actually, these countries which were a part and parcel of the USA, they belonged to what is called as the Western Europe. So this was one of the blocs that came into being that time in the world because of the Cold War. So those countries which were led by United States of America and which had implemented the ideology of USA, that is capitalism, democratic liberalism in their country, they formed an organization, a military organization called as North Atlantic Treaty Organization in April 1949. And what was decided, what was, you know, actually declared by them? They said that, you know, if any country of the world makes a move against any of the 12 nations that were a part of NATO, that means a war against any country of NATO will be considered an attack or a war against all the nations that were a part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So they actually formed an organization to strengthen themselves. And they actually gave themselves something that was more powerful than USSR. But to counter such policies and to show that we are not weak than you, or we are not, you can say, on back foot. But for example, if you have made some allies in the world, so do we. We also can make more and more allies and can counter your policies at any point of time. So to give their policies and programs a concrete shape, USSR or the Soviet Union, on the other hand, they signed a treaty what was called as Warsaw Pact. It was signed in 1955 and it was a counter policy of NATO. You know, the same things were said or same things were declared by those countries which were a part of the Warsaw Pact or which were a part of the communist Russia at that time, who had implemented the communism and socialism as their ideology in their parts. You know, they declared that any country of the world, if they dare to attack any of the 9 nations, because actually 9 members were a part of the Warsaw Pact. They were the original signatories of Warsaw Pact, which was signed in Poland, and Warsaw is the capital of Poland. It was decided that if the attack by any country of any of the nations of Warsaw Pact comes into being, it will not be considered an attack on that nation only, but it will be considered an attack on all the nations of the Warsaw Pact or the communist Russia, and all of us together will crush that nation and will show the strength to the world. Let me tell you that those countries which were led by USSR, they were a part and parcel of the Eastern Europe. So that's why those countries which were led by USA, they were from Western Europe, so it was called as West Bloc. And those countries which were a part and parcel of the USSR, they were from East Europe, so this was called as Eastern Bloc. Okay, so 2 blocks were there I was talking about. First, Western Bloc, and the second one was Eastern Bloc. Some of the nations or all the nations from the western part of the Europe, they supported USA, and all the nations of the East Europe, they supported USSR, you know, by implementing their ideologies in their country and by implementing the system of government that they had in their countries. For example, USA was supporting capitalism and USSR was supporting communism and socialism. So these were the 2 ideologies that were implemented by the allied countries of USA and USSR. So this was the situation of the world that time. This is what was called as Cold War, and now I'll be telling you about the second definition of the Cold War to make the concept of Cold War more clear to you. So the second definition has been given by Joseph Fremble. Second definition has been given by Joseph Fremble. Okay, he says that the Cold War may be regarded as a sparring match between the 2 giant states, a succession of moves and counter moves. A succession of moves and counter moves. I have written one more word there. I say succession of allies and counter allies. I have already explained the point to you. Let me explain the definition to you so that we may understand the concept of Cold War in a best way. See, I said that Joseph Fremble says the Cold War may be regarded as a sparring match between the 2 giant states, and these 2 giant states were USA and USSR. Okay, so it was a sparring match, the match that they have never played yet. So it may come into being because we are not sure about the policies and programs that they are making in the world right now. For example, if at any point of time the tense and hostile relations turn out to be very, very deep, a third world war may come into being, and that match will be played. So I'm talking about the match that this person was talking about is not a match like cricket match, tennis match or football match. This person is talking about the Third World War. So maybe sometimes, the relations that we have, these may be tense, but the turn can be very harsh, it can be brutal, and a third world war may come into being between these two giant states at any point of time. So this is a sparring match, and both the countries are making moves, and they're making succession moves or counter moves to strengthen themselves and to weaken the other country of the world, other superpower of the world. I said they're making allies and counter allies. Let me explain the point again. See, I said that there were two different military pacts that were signed or formed by USA and USSR, but that was not all what actually it looks like. For example, after some time USA signed few more pacts with the other countries of the world, so that the area that they had, the supporters that they had, could be expanded to each and every corner of the world, to the nook and corner of the world. So that's why CETO, SENATO or Baghdad Pact or the Middle East Pact kind of treaties were signed by USA. And on the other hand, you can say that a pact was signed by USSR or Soviet Union with China, then with Vietnam, North Korea and the other countries of the world, so that they can make more and more allies and can counter the policies and programs of USA. So that's why I said allies and counter allies. Before that, this person said, this contemporary political thinker said, a succession of moves and counter moves. And what were the moves? For example, the program of going to the moon, it was started by, or you can say going into the space, it was started by USSR. To counter the policies of USSR, United States of America, they sent their own mission to moon, which was called as Apollo. And this is how we came to know about the landing of Neil Armstrong and Yuri Gagarin on the surface of moon. So this was not something that we wanted to discover. This is not something that United States of America wanted to discover that time. No doubt that it is a part and development of the science and technological advancement. But on the other hand, you must not forget that this was a move that was actually made by USA in response to the move that was made by USSR. So this is what actually Cold War was all about. So these two definitions make us understand the meaning and proper concept of Cold War. Let's talk about the history of Cold War, how it started in the world, and what were the developments that actually followed after the Cold War came into being in the world. So history of the Cold War. Now you understand the meaning of Cold War. We shall be talking about the history of Cold War. Okay, so let me tell you that soon after the end of the Second World War, that is 1945, the tense and hostile relations between USA and USSR started, and for 45 years following the World War II, after the end of the Second World War, the globe and the people of the globe, they were threatened by the possibility of a catastrophic war that may come into being between USA and USSR. Right now, they're not going to make use of the conventional weapons. They're not going to make use of these weapons, but they are going to make use of what they had that time. And they had the atom bombs, or you can say nuclear weapons. And if such a war comes into being, they may turn the whole world into the mass graveyard of the human civilization and everything else that is present on the planet Earth. So if you want to give something good to the people, this must not happen. So that's why I said that for 45 years after the end of the Second World War, the globe was threatened by a catastrophic war or a third world war that may come into being between USA and USSR. But this time they are not going to make use of their conventional weapons, but they are going to make use of their weapons of mass destruction. And this is how they may turn the whole world into the mass graveyard of the human civilization and all the biodiversity that is present in this world. So the people of the world, they always had doubt in their mind what to do and how to prevent such a war. But the people cannot help it, because the superpowers of the world, they are keen to strengthen themselves and to weaken the other. But I must not, forget to tell you that both these superpowers, they never crossed the line, because they also knew that if a third world war comes into being, then the nuclear weapons will be used, and this may prove fatal for the survival of all the species on the very planet Earth. So this is what actually was in their mind. But let me tell you that this war that was going on for 45 years, it was not an actual war, as I have been telling you. It was an ideological war. And it was a war between free enterprise versus communism. It was a war between free enterprise and communism. Okay, or versus communism. On the other hand, you can say that it was a war between democracy and totalitarianism. So this was a war between democracy and totalitarianism, or you can say that this was a war that was between capitalism versus communism and socialism. So this is what the war was all about, and it was not an actual hot war that was fought between USA and USSR starting from 1945 till 1991. Both the sides, they abhorred each other and spared various propagandas among their people and anybody else willing to listen about the other's evil empire, so that they can strengthen themselves and so that they can make the counter policies to reckon with the other superpower of the world. Let's talk about the usage of the term, how the term was used and who was the first person to use the term. Okay, let's talk about the usage of the term. Usage of the term. The term has an American origin. I'm talking about the term Cold War. So the term has an American origin, and this term for the first time was used by an American statesman. His name was Bernard Brosh. When in the month of April, and on April 6, 1946, on the emancipation of the Truman Doctrine, he used the term Cold War, in a course of his speech, when he said, "Let us not be deceived. Let us not be deceived today. We are in the midst of Cold War. We are in the midst of Cold War between the Soviet Union and Western states. So he knew that the things that are there in the world right now, they are not good, and they must not be, you can say, they must not be erased from our mind. They must be paid a proper attention so that we may try to solve this problem as soon as possible and a third world war may not come into being. So that's why he said that let's not be deceived today. We are in the midst of Cold War between the Soviet Union and the Western states. Soviet Union, that is USSR, Western states, that is North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or the states led by United States of America. So this was the term, and this is who was the first person to use the term on April 6, 1946 in Truman Doctrine. Okay, so let's talk about the I told you that the term was used by Bernard Brosh, but Bernard Brosh was not the person who popularized the term. It was one more person. His name was Professor Walter Lippmann. Was the person who was a very famous and well respected columnist of the time, who used the term and popularized the term after it was used by Bernard Brosh, an American statesman. You know, the people who actually popularized the term, they are actually writers, and they always write about these things in their columns, in newspapers, in journals, in books, and everything else that they have in their hands. So that's why I said that this person, Professor Walter Lippmann, he was a very famous and respected columnist of that time. So he used the term oftenly and tried to make the people understand about the situation of the world and what Cold War is all about. So the term was popularized by this person, even though that the term was used by the American statesman Bernard Brosh. But he is not the person who actually told the people about the real purpose and real meaning of the term, about the situation that was going on in the world that time. So the credit goes to Sir Walter Lippmann, or Professor Walter Lippmann. You know, even Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru tried to, make the people understand the term in his own words by saying that it was a brain war. It was a brain war, nerve war, and a propaganda war. That was kept into operation. It was the first Prime Minister of our country, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru. He used the term in his own way to make the people understand about Cold War. That was all from me today about Cold War, meaning and definitions of Cold War, and a little bit about the history of the Cold War. We shall meet again in the next lecture. Till then, fi amanillah.